Thanks so much for coming in. Thanks for the interview. Thanks for giving our viewers and our listeners an idea of what they can expect from relational accountability, learning a little bit about that at the Denver Postmodern Therapy Gathering, and then a little bit about you, too, and who you are in sort of our amalgam of work here
awesome
in the
people.
Denver. Awesome people.
Well, my name's Lindsey, and I'm a marriage and family therapist by training, and it was our training for our program was very specifically social justice, feminist, queer affirmative, and narrative all together. So we learned about other theories, but we didn't really learn how to do them. It was pretty postmodern, inclusive through the whole thing.
But just sort of an ideological?
Yeah, like the way we ran clinic meetings, the way we tried to do classes, interactions with each other was all about understanding how our sense of self was being influenced and the accountability of making sure that we're the person that we need to be and that we want to be with our clients, with our peers, and with the people in our personal lives as well. Okay. Yeah, like really trying to integrate into as many areas of life as possible.
Yeah, and you're saying that maybe this relational accountability practice is actually taking that theory and put it into a way of being or a way of working?
Yeah, and so it's really about using how well we know other people that we are in committed relationships with, whether that's friends, whether that's a partner, family members, coworkers, and being accountable to how they influence themselves with us. And so I explain this with my clients of saying, like basically being aware of how you affect the world around you. And taking ownership of that and not being a passive participant in how you affect other people, but being accountable to that and how you want to be. And so really it's taking ownership over how you affect other people's stories of themselves.
Yeah.
And so I explain with my clients, especially younger clients who aren't really going to want to get into the theory part behind it, of saying like, if you came into my office and I just immediately checked my watch and I was like, go.
Sure.
Right? Like I'm sending a message of how I feel about you as a person.
Yeah.
And that's going to affect you, especially if it's your clinician doing that. Like the person who's supposed to be having unconditional positive regard for you doesn't really show it. It's going to follow you out of the office and affect how you see yourself as a person. And so I say, I don't want you to feel like you don't matter. I don't want you to feel like you're unimportant to me. And so when you come in, I have, like, my phone's off, I have full attention on you, right? Because I want you to feel important because you are. And so it's about me holding myself accountable to how I'm immediately affecting how other people experience themselves.
Okay, so that accountability sounds like integrity, it sounds like some awareness of, like, the ripples that you affect in the world, and actually as a clinician, you're aware of the way your ripples impact your clients, even from the very first word that's spoken in session.
Yeah, and I live it with my partner as well. He doesn't know the theory behind relational accountability. I'm not going to bore him with, he doesn't care about the theory behind it.
He hasn't gone to a workshop.
No.
Practiced on him.
He's gone to a narrative workshop I've given, but I don't think he's gone to any relational accountability ones. Okay. I've invited him, and he had just, I was like, really, I don't care if you go or not. Like, this is me being honest with you, that I really, it's up to you if you want to go or not. And he decided to go skiing, and I was like, that's okay. Yeah. Like, that's all right. And anyway, but that, I live it with my partner, even though he doesn't know the theory and the tenets behind it. He knows that I'm working hard to make sure that when I communicate with him, that I'm communicating in a way that he can understand me. And especially with, in our relationship, he's from a different country. So his family has a completely different culture than mine does. So I know he might interpret me differently than how I intend to come across. And I have to take accountability that it doesn't matter how I intended to come across. What matters is how I actually do end up coming across.
Sure.
Right? So the difference between intentionality and impact is a huge piece of relational accountability as well.
Okay, and I'm glad that you characterize that as a piece. I'm wondering for myself, what if there are different pieces to this pie of relational accountability? What might be 2 or 3 other pieces that really kind of characterize the work, or make it really important or special to you, different than other modalities that we might be bumping around into?
I think one of the main pieces is, I mean, as a family-trained clinician, right, I'm always focusing on relationships rather than like intrapsychic work. And so I think it's putting more emphasis on the effects that relationships have on our intrapsychic experience, right? That we're not in a vacuum. Who I am, who all of us are, is because of our relationships that we've had up until this point.
Yeah.
And so if we aren't really able to be represented the way we want to be in those relationships, that's going to come back on us at some point.
Okay.
Like if other people interpret me as cold or uncaring, I'm going to notice that in my interactions with other people, even if I'm not trying to be that way. And that's going to change my experience of myself too. So it's sort of the, it goes into the communal relationship orientation. I don't remember who did that work. I cited it in my thesis and I can't remember who did that work right now. Yeah. But communal and exchange orientation of like exchange orientation is I'm going to do this for you because I'm expecting you'll do something back for me. Versus, like a tit for tat sort of an idea. But communal is I'm going to do this, put this good out into the world through this relationship because I know eventually I'll benefit from this too. It'll help everybody. And so it's really, so the first part being the intent versus impact. I think another piece is that we all benefit from more effective communication, more genuine communication, and tuning in with other people more than we do as a culture. I think we're pushed into individual mindset of us versus me versus everybody else, right? I was going to say us versus them, but it's really more me versus everybody else and us versus them at the same time. And relational accountability is about saying, no, we're all a collective, and let's start to put into that collective rather than just me or my in-group. Yeah.
Something you said in there that really struck me is that phrase, like, good for everyone.
Yeah.
That, like, the ripples, as we were discussing earlier, this way that you affect somebody else's life, or and through your awareness of being interpreted, and your intention being interpreted correctly, I get this sense that it's like, well, I'm actually putting myself into the world in such a way as to impact their life for the better, but your ripples continue on past them.
Yeah.
Is there sort of this, I don't know what you would call it, energetic sense, or this like idea of ordering or constructing a world that's like, I don't know, in line with your own integrity, or that, like, because you have a role to play in sort of this bigger story?
Yeah, I kind of see it as a life hack. Like, for example, if I needed to ask a favor, right? So I remember actually year and a half ago, I was trying to get a space and resources to do a training on relational accountability, and I didn't have a space, I didn't have the network to really get a big turnout. I needed help, right? And so it's sort of like using relational accountability. If I want something from somebody else, I need them to feel a certain way about themselves to increase the likelihood that they'll help me out. And so if I just swoop into somebody and say, hey, I need you to do these things for me, or when can you do these things for me, that would probably lead them to feeling used or not respected, which means, A, that's hurting them, and that's not in line with my ethic, right? I want to increase the amount of good in the world, not subtract from it. And then I'm more likely to get what I need out of this interaction as well. So being really intentional about, like, hey, would you like to get some coffee? Would you like to go out for brunch somewhere? How are you? Tell me what's going on in your life. And then, oh, by the way, I have this thing going on. And so it's about, I think we get, what's the word I want? Coaxed into this go, get stuff done, be as productive and quick as possible. And so we treat other people like objects in that. And it's about saying, no, people are not objects. And one of the sources that grew to form relational accountability was the book Leadership and Self-Deception, Getting Out of the Box,
right.
about how other people are not objects in your way, right? And you can fire someone. That there's an example in the book about you can fire someone and still be thinking of other people as human, right? It's the way that you go about doing it, and so it's just doing the same things but more human, more connection, more caring about how other people experience their day too.
Wow. Any other pieces that you would really like to highlight for our audiences? Just knowing too that they're going to have so much more of a context and sort of robust teaching at the gathering, but as we're talking about these pieces, are there any other really burning things you'd love to?
There's one other one.
One more.
And it actually relates to, I have a very strong ethic of social justice as well. Yeah. And so I use relational accountability to explain to people in my personal life too how, because I have a wide political spectrum in my family.
I see.
And so, is that a nice euphemism for it?
Yeah, that was
and thank you for that. And so when I'm trying to have conversations about why it's hurtful to use certain language, and oftentimes the person who's used hurtful language isn't trying to be hurtful and is a really good person, right? Like they have good values. They're just not understanding why someone else would be upset about something. And so the piece that we talk about in the training is the difference between the golden rule and the platinum rule, right? So the golden rule is treat other people the way you want to be treated. Yeah. And I always say that's BS, right? At work, it's a kindergarten level understanding of empathy, right? We teach kindergartners the golden rule because they're kindergartners, but we don't level up in our training about empathy as we age. Yeah. And so it's about saying, if we were all clones of each other, the golden rule would be just fine, because treating other people how you want to be treated would also be treating them how they want to be treated. Right. But we are different people with different experiences. And so it's not fair for me to say, well, I'm treating you the way I would want to be treated and you shouldn't be upset about that because you've had different experiences than I have had, right? And so, for example, I could say something incredibly homophobic and be like, well, I didn't mean it that way. You shouldn't take it in a hurtful way. So that goes back to the intent versus impact, right? Yeah. But that someone else is going to be negatively hurt by that. Is that the influence you want to have in the world? You can't justify, well, you shouldn't be hurt by that. Right? So the platinum rule being treat other people the way they want to be treated. I mean, when I teach that to my undergrad classes, you can just see them go like, huh. Like wheels start shifting again, right? In a different way.
Because they're starting to realize oh, I'd actually have to know that person.
Yeah.
Well, I'd have to have a relationship with them.
Exactly.
I'd have to really be aware enough to be sensitive.
And clue into that information as you're communicating. It's not enough to just have that information and store it in a back file. You have to actively be pulling it and using it. Yeah. And so my partner, for example, from my intimate knowing of him, I know that when we're having I call them discussions. We don't yell, we just sigh a lot. And so when we're having discussions and I get irritated, I tend to throw my hands up and do this. That sound of me hitting the couch or wherever I'm sitting, just in frustration, I know it raises his anxiety level. Right? And so I don't want him to experience himself as attacked. I don't want him to experience himself as not good enough or frustrating to me, even if the situation is frustrating. That doesn't change how I feel about him, right? And so I try to be accountable to, I know this about him. I don't want him to feel that way. So when I can tell that I'm getting a little frustrated, I try to put my hands under my legs. Right? So that I'm not tempted to do that. And he has to know vice versa that, and I wouldn't expect anybody else to know this, but that when I'm in a conversation with someone and they say my name, I interpret that as being very condescending. And so if we were talking, you're like, well, Lindsey, I'm going to shut down right there. No. So anybody else I wouldn't expect to know that. The barista at Starbucks, I would not expect to know that about me. Right? And it's not a client's job to know that, right? It depends on the relationship with that person.
Mm-hmm.
But I do expect him to know that about me. Okay. And so he makes an effort to not say, well, Lindsey, even though that doesn't affect him in that way.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
so we're making these efforts to try to help each other feel more comfortable, even in a discussion, right? Mm-hmm. We're still trying to be accountable to how we influence the other person.
Because accountability is this sense of having like a negotiated social contract that has like certain expectations you are each aware of, because you know that he likes to be treated in this way, or not hear that like slap on the couch, or he's mindful of like what you need in that moment too.
And it's about caring about that. And we've had to have discussions about that, because culturally I think we're taught you are responsible for how you interpret the world, and that's not my job.
Right.
Culturally, that's how we tend to go about things. And so at one point years ago, he said, I'm not responsible for how you feel. And I was like, yeah, you are. You're not in control of it, but you have an influence.
Sure.
And I was like, I work really hard to make sure that I'm influencing you in a way that I'm consenting to be influencing you in. And he was like, you do? I was like, I spend a lot of effort making sure that I influence you in a way that I want to influence you. I want you to feel worthy and validated and loved. Like, I'm going to put effort into helping you feel that way. Yeah. And so I think since we've talked about it, even though I'm not giving him a lecture, I don't have a prezi going, when I'm talking to him about it. Because that would probably influence him to feel dumb if I started lecturing him, right? Yeah. That's not helpful. It's not how I want him to feel. Yeah. So we negotiate it as the relationship goes. So I think it's also about understanding people change. Yeah. And your relationship, your interaction with them changes too. Because you're going to change, they're going to change. The relationship changes with you.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I have this experience in my own life personally, and maybe from a past life.
Yeah.
But, this idea that the word accountability has sort of been taken up with this idea of self-policing, or like the policing of others, right? It sets up this like punitive structure of consequence versus truth, and I wonder if relational accountability holds the word accountability like that, or if it's different.
It's different, and when you ask that question, I think of political correctness, right? Okay. Of like, words we're allowed to say, words we're not allowed to say, sure. And then you're a bad person if such, like, I think it's more accountability. I say with my clients, there's a fine line between accountability and blame.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And we do have accountability buddies, sure. Like whatever phrasing you want to use for it. And I think as long as, if that person was supporting you and holding to your, like, hey, remember your values, remember why you want to do this, I think that's accountability versus like, why aren't you doing this thing that you should be doing, and like shaming. Yeah. I think blaming is coming from someone else to that person, right? Like, accountability from someone else is very often taken as blame, rightfully so, right? And so that sort of goes back to the leadership and self-deception book, is that no one else can tell you you're in the box, right? You have to notice for yourself, I'm doing this, and then check, is this in line with my own value system? If not, I need to change something, right? Sure. And so I don't think I tell my clients, it's going to be really hard for you to not try to catch your partner not being accountable. Like, you're going to be tempted to say, well, I was accountable way more than you were accountable, sure. Which does feel good in the moment. I understand that, but it's not helpful for long term, because it's still doing this like me versus you idea. Whereas if it's the collective, we are working on this relationship together, counting frequency of who was accountable more than the other does not help in that situation. It actually has you pulling apart from each other. And so it's like working with each other to be accountable, and then the more you're accountable, the more it supports your partner in being accountable as well. Right? And then it's my job as the clinician to say, do you feel you were as accountable as you would have liked to have been? But it's not the partner's job to do that, because that takes away from the team. Right?
Sure. Yeah. And you use this word values that sort of the accountability is like how much from your values are you living? How close are you to your values?
Yeah.
And is that are those shared values?
Yes and no. Okay. Like, so I like to keep, yes, there's an awareness of what my values are, but it's also my value of how I hope you feel about yourself, how I hope to be influencing your story. And so I think Jared calls them relational values as well, of versus my individual value of integrity and respect and genuine. But my relational value is, like I mentioned earlier, I want my partner to feel validated. I want him to feel loved. Like when he looks in the mirror and thinks about the person looking back at him, I want him to experience these values as part of who he is. Yeah. And so it's about how can I interact with him in a way that supports him in feeling that way, even if I'm frustrated. It's not about don't be angry ever, right? Like you can still be angry, just like you can still fire someone from the book and see them as a human being. You can still be frustrated and say, hey, it really bothers me when you X, Y, or Z, and use I statements. When you did this, it led me to feel this way. Sure. And still do it with care and compassion and seeing your partner as a worthy, whole person. Yeah.
Love that. And it has this certain flavor that I've actually gotten from like an emotionally focused therapy too, and sort of that interactional kind of way of speaking. Is it am I off in that way, or
no? I think you're right.
Like overlap there.
I think you're right, and I remember learning EFT just in theory. It was really funny. Like I was seeing couples, and then I started learning EFT, and then all my couples went away from the clinic where we were doing internship. And then I went into an internship where it was only families. So I never actually practiced EFT. Sure. I know the theory, but I never actually got to practice it. And now I'm in RA, so I don't really want to move from that. But anyway, I think the similarity is that it's not just, it's never about the dishwasher. It's never about you always have the TV on too loud, or you never make the bed, or whatever the thing is. You don't hold my hand. It's not about that thing. It's about the message that's underneath that, right? And so EFT, I think, gets to the primary attachment injury that's underneath those messages, whereas RA looks at it from how is this affecting your story of who you are, right?
Somewhat situated in identity.
Yeah, your story of yourself. Yeah. And so if, let's see, One example I use a lot is my partner used to work in retail. He was a manager at a sporting goods store. So he was really good at delegating tasks. And when we moved into our new house, he was all excited about getting stuff unpacked, and he was going to get a trailer and drive back to our home state to get like discarded furniture from our families because, new home, we didn't have anything to put in it. And so he was like, well, I'm going to have you unpack all of the boxes while I'm gone. And then when I come back, there will be space for the new furniture. And I was like, you're not going to have me do anything. No. Yeah. Because the message that I took from that was, you think you have more power than I do in this relationship. And no, you don't. Right? We're partners. I use that language very intentionally. We are partners, right? Yeah. And so the first time he said that, I got really upset because I was responding to that underlying message, the unintended message of, you think you have more power, you think I'm less than, you think I'm an employee. I'm not okay with that, right? So the first time I got really upset, we had a discussion. Then he said, I'm sorry, I won't do it again. Then he did it again because if we were going by the golden rule, it wouldn't matter because it doesn't bother him. If I said to him, I'm going to have you clean the cat box, okay. Sure. It's not a thing to him, right? Yeah. And so after a while, he was like, can you let me know when I do it, even if I'm frustrated? Like, still tell me, hey, you just did it. And so now, if he says, I'm going to have you, I just go, and he'll go, can you please X, Y, or Z? And I'll say, sure thing, bud. Like, I'm happy to do things. I just don't want to be told to do them. I would like to be asked. right?
Be part of the team, but 50/50.
Exactly. And so it's little things. It's not about the language. It's about the message that was underneath, about how I think you see me, which is going to affect how I experience me. And especially if this is an ongoing thing, like if I never told him my experience when you say I'm going to have you, is that I feel like I'm less than, or that I'm seen as less than. If I never told him that, and he did that once a week for 10 years, it's going to build up.
Sure.
Some resentment's going to get there, right? And I like to think of things in mathematical, like therapy equations, right? Like resentment is hurt plus time.
Oh, okay.
No healing.
Yeah.
Not addressing it. It's the buildup of little hurts or big hurts that never get addressed.
Death by a thousand paper cuts.
Exactly. I always use this metaphor. I'm a big metaphor fan of if my partner was, I don't know why this would ever be happening, but say my partner was shooting off a gun just for fun, like target practice. And in some weird situation, it ricochets and hits me in the leg, right? I can say, you shot me in the leg. And he could say, well, I didn't mean to. I still have a bullet in my leg, right?
Yeah.
And if we don't address it, it just stays in there and festers and could get infected and then moves around and causes problem over time, right? And so the work that we do in relational accountability is opening that up, going through what actually happened, supporting the partner who may have unintentionally caused harm to be accountable, understand the impact of that action, identify if they're okay with that action or that impact or not, and what their values for how that other person would feel, how that would guide them in doing different in the future. And then that's sort of the process of using antibiotic and first aid and stitching it up and bandaging it with love and care, right? But if we just pretend it didn't happen or say, well, I didn't mean to, you shouldn't be upset.
Sure.
That's not going to work. Right?
Right. I wonder if there's anything else that you'd really hope to share, kind of give our audience, listeners, viewers.
Yeah. I think the last thing is that relational accountability has also helped me to see that people are doing the best they can with the resources they have. Which I'm borrowing that phrase from Brene Brown to be completely transparent, right? But that if we don't have the resources to understand unintended messages, postmodern ideas, most people aren't given this information, right? And so it's very hard after learning relational accountability to see people as not acting in their best way, right? Like people are trying. We're all trying. And so there's a little bit of grace, I think, that needs to be included in relational accountability too, that we don't all have to be held to this expectation of being 100% accountable all the time. That's not possible, right? We're humans, we're flawed, but that we can learn to see, okay, I understand even if you hurt me, that you were doing the best you could at this moment with the resources that you had. And I think my job as the clinician is to provide extra resources, additional resources, to help act in a way that's more in line with your own ethics, right? But a lot of times people don't have those resources. So it's about giving that grace too.
That they're sort of in the midst of kind of a worldview shift.
It's not easy. Like sitcoms do not model relational accountability. Most of our parents did not model relational accountability. Sure. So it's about giving some grace in the learning process as well.
Yeah. Awesome. Cool. Thanks for all that.
Yeah, thank you for asking.
Great little capsule there. I'm looking forward to the full-length workshop.
Yeah, I'm super stoked for it.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome.